Welcome to this overview of the lab solution demos. This collection of videos provides a step-by-step demonstration of all 11 labs, which includes 62 practices. Now, these recordings are useful if you need help while executing the hands-on labs yourself, but others find these to be additionally informative as I provide extra instruction along the way while I do the steps. And if you're unable to request a lab environment, watching these videos is certainly the next best thing. Enjoy. Welcome to the overview for Lab 1, getting started with OIC integrations. And since this is the first one, you can well imagine that this particular lab exercise is going to be critical, because if we can scroll down here, you can see that you've got to take a look at your assigned OU OIC environment and actually set up your first project and create your first integration. So you really need to do everything in this particular lab exercise before you can do any of the other ones. Now let's quickly review what's going on here. There are 5 practices. I'll have a separate recording for each of the practices, and they kind of dovetail into one another. So this is really an end-to-end lab from beginning 1.1 all the way through 1.5. You're going to create a project, you're going to create adapter connections, creating an integration, then you'll run the integration, do a quick test, and show you how to monitor the results. Now, if you look down below, you'll see there are some prerequisites. You obviously have to have an environment. So if you haven't done that yet, you're obviously going to need to get a subscription to be able to request a lab environment. Also, once you have that lab environment, under the Guides tab, you'll see where you can download the resources for this particular set of labs, to include the activity guide, as well as the lab resources zip file, where we expect that you to go ahead and extract that and see them in the resources folder. Now, since I haven't done that yet, I thought I'd just kind of quickly demonstrate how easy that is to do. So I've got my lab resources zip file in this Oracle folder, and I'm just literally going to extract it right here. And once I've done that, I can see my extracted contents are all below, and we'll be using all of these throughout the conduct of all the other labs along the way. Sample files like JSON and CSV files, as well as other resources we'll need like schemas or XML files, and also these solution projects. If you want to load a solution project into your environment, you'll use your student number that you've been assigned, so that you can load in with a unique set of names. In fact, I talk about this in Appendix 3. So speaking of Appendix 3, let's quickly review. This is a good time to talk about those. That there are 3 appendices that are located at the end of these set of practices, and you really should kind of take a look at these now before you start doing all the exercises, so that you can come back and use it as a reference later on if you need to. So what I'd like to do is quickly scroll down to the end where the appendices are and talk about each of these 3. This one is for recovering a locked integration, because what's going to happen somewhere along the line, you're going to have your UI freeze up on you because you lose connectivity, or there's a UI error, or something goes wrong. And sometimes you can just refresh the screen and that solves the problem, but other times your integration will actually become what they call locked. And so there are instructions here for how to unlock it. You just simply follow them step by step. There will be 2 different scenarios, one where there are unsaved changes and you can edit and recover. In other cases where there are no changes, you'll just simply unlock from the dialog box. The second appendix I want you to read through is make sure you understand the issues that involve with copy paste. When you're doing different labs along the way, occasionally you'll have a large set of text that you don't want to type. You want to save your time and you just want to copy paste. Well, sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't. Usually the issue is when you're trying to copy and paste something with single quotes or double quotes. And really, the workaround for that is to simply be aware of that issue, and then when you do any kind of copy and pasting involving single or double quotes, just simply remove them and manually retype them yourself, and usually be okay. All right. And the third one gets to talk about those solution projects. So there really only one solution project per student. We recommend that you don't load those in. I mean, you only want to do it if you really have to. I'm going to recommend that there are only really two good use cases for using solutions. One use case is you truly are stuck. You've tried to do the exercise, you've done troubleshooting, you've gone through everything, and then you've done all the exercises, and towards the end you kind of go, well, I'd like to go back and look at I don't know, lab 6 or lab 7 to see how that would have worked, because I really got stuck and I couldn't finish it. Well, if that's the case, then you can load in the solution and then kind of take a look and see what that was done there. However, the other use case that I can kind of appreciate is the fact that some of you will not want to do the labs or don't have time to do the labs, or maybe you're an Oracle employee and you don't have access to get to a lab environment. Well, you've chosen now that you kind of maybe want to watch the videos and then maybe load the solutions project into an environment that you do have access to see that they are done. Anyway, we show you how to import that solution project, follow those step-by-step instructions, make sure that you don't make any extra edits along the way if you want the solution to work. And of course, once you want to execute an integration solution, there may be some extra steps that you still may need to do, for example, configuring the connections. All right, I've talked long enough. I know you're ready to get started on Lab 1.1, which will get us started. Again, we're going to go into your assigned environment. I'm going to show you how to log in. We're going to go through all the steps that are needed. We'll see you in the next video. Okay, welcome to practice 1-1, where we're going to start off with creating a project. In fact, everything you do for the remaining of this course and all the labs will be involved in this project you're about to create. But in addition to that, you're also going to do some additional tasks in this lab to go ahead and get set up and get started. So let's kind of get through, and I'm going to kind of keep referring to these tasks and then show you hands-on. The first thing you want to do is on your lab tab. Now, because I'm doing this demo here, I can't show you that exactly, but here's a good screenshot of what it's going to look like. You're looking for your credentials. Those are going to be right here. For me, I've got mine pasted into an area so that I know what mine are. And then the other one you're looking for is the URL. And this URL will be provided to you. Again, I've got mine pasted in, ready to go. So let's go ahead and see what this looks like. We're going to have to navigate in and then change our password. Let me do that now. So there's my username and the password I was provided. And as I log in, it immediately expects me to reset that. So I'll paste in the old password one more time and then create a new one. And now that my password has been reset, I now log into the integration for the first time. So what's really important in the lab instructions make a good point of this. Only you know what your new password is. So if you forget what you use for your new password, we're not going to be able to help you, because you only have the environment for a short period of time and the trouble it takes to go through there. So please write that down, keep it handy so you can keep logging back in every time you need to into this environment. So beginning with step 2, we have some instructions for navigating around. We want to go to the navigation menu. We want to click into the projects page. We want to then add a new project, and we're expected to give it a name based upon your last name and your ORA number. Now, if you recall, when I set mine up, and again, I'll just show you, I was given these credentials to do this demo, and I noticed that I'm an ORA 002. So I'm going to use ORA 002 from now on, and since that's my last name, I'm just going to keep a track of the fact that, yes, I am Mills and I am ORA 002. So I'm going to use that from now on when I need to use a unique name along the way. Sounds good? All right, so let's do that now. I navigate up here. And that's how we expand the menu. And under projects, I can see that there are no projects yet, but notice that there's a filter here for me. Now, there might be other students and learners working in your environment. And if there were, now I'm going to take that tab away. Notice that there are none, so there are no projects anywhere in here. But had there been, you might see other students' projects in there, but it doesn't really matter. You won't have access to theirs anyway. So I click on Add, click on Create, and then I'm going to use that name for the project that the lab instructions asked me to do. And in this case, it's my last name and my aura number, which is 002, and everything else can remain the same. Now, notice if I clicked on this, which I don't want to do, then other people could actually edit, which you don't want to do that because you don't want some other student or learner to accidentally or potentially maliciously jump in and mess around with your project resources. And then I click Create. Notice I get a confirmation banner. And notice now it opens me up directly into my project. Let's look at our lab instructions one more time. We've completed creating the project. The only thing left for me to do is to click the go back arrow, which is located up here. So let me do that now. And it says I'll be able to see my project in the draft status. And indeed, there's my project, and it's in the draft status. See you in the next video. All right, welcome to practice 1-2, where we're going to create a new integration. So again, I'm going to be following step by step the tasks that are in this lab activity guide. And since you have a copy of that, rather than keep going back and forth between step 1, step 2, and back to the screen, I'm just going to do them and talk my way through them. So let me move this out of my way. To my other monitor, and I'll follow the instructions as laid out in the activity guide. So the very first step asks me to go in and open up my project. I can click on the link to do that again. And you'll notice by default, it opens up on the design page. We'll talk about these more later. There's the deploy page, there's the observe page where we'll be doing other tasks later on. At this point, I'm going to create a new integration, so I'm in the integrations pane, click on add. And now this opens up where I'm going to now select an option. In this case, I'm not looking to import or copy one. I'm looking to create a new one. And we have two choices of patterns at this point. It's either application or schedule. The instruction says I should use application and that I should call it hello world. So I'll type that in, and really that's all there is to do. It says leave all the other fields as they're designed and not to do anything else here. So let's click create. And now we're ready to kind of get going. Now you'll notice over here that in the connections panel, we can go ahead and get ready to start defining a trigger. So when I click on add trigger at this point, it opens up creating the connection page. So the instructions now beginning with step 8 says if I do a quick search and just type REST, I'll see that the one I'm looking for is literally the generic technology REST adapter. So I select that one. And then it says immediately I need to go ahead and make sure that we give it the proper name. We're going to call it, as the instructions require, simply REST trigger. We're going to actually use this for lots of other labs later on, but in this particular case, we're going to scope it to only be used as a trigger role within our integrations. So again, we leave all of the fields as is, and I click Create. Beginning in step 13, it says I need to provide for a security policy. Well, I can choose either OAuth 2 or basic authentication or both. Well, the instruction says for the purposes of this lab, let's just keep it at basic authentication and everything else remains the same. And it's asking me now to go ahead and do a test first. Before you save it, you need to test it. I got that confirmation banner. I can dismiss that, and then it says I need to save that integration. And the very last thing it wants me to do is to click the go back arrow. So every time you see the instructions for go back arrow, it's talking about this little thing up here in the upper left hand corner. When I click that, that takes me out of the pane. And in this case, now it brings me into my integration page. Now, the instructions say that we want to go ahead and see that the REST trigger is ready to use. We're not going to go ahead and configure it yet. Instead, we're going to do that in the next practice. We'll see you in the next video. Welcome to practice 1-3, configure the trigger connection. So obviously we're picking up where we left off from the last practice. We're going to configure the REST trigger for the integration and walk through the steps to give it the appropriate relative URI and so forth. Now, as before, what I'm going to do is go through all these instructions step by step. If you want to follow along by looking at your activity guide PDF, please feel free to do so. So the very first thing it does, it says, well, if the pop-up menu box is no longer a menu. So if for some reason you didn't go directly to the next thing, and let's say that everything is kind of gone, it's possible you might not see that pop-up menu. In that case, you could just click on this. Now, the other thing that to get that back, the other thing that could have happened is maybe you lost your connection and you had to reopen your integration again. So that's possible. Here's what that would have looked like. Your integration would have been closed. You come back to your project and you would see now your connection over here in the connections pane, and you'd see your integration in the integration area. So if that were to happen, look, you just simply open it back up. There's two ways to do that. One is to click here and edit. The other is simply to double click or just click on the link, and that'll also open it up in edit mode. And notice now we're back to where we left off. So continuing on with the instructions, we've selected the REST trigger. It's the only one we have. And now we're here on the basic information page, and we're instructed to call this hello world, leaving all of the fields as is. Obviously, we could add some descriptions here, which we're not. And again, we expect it to advance to the configured resource configuration page. At this point, the only thing that we're really required to do is define at the top. We don't have to define any descriptions if we don't want to. In this case, we're not. So we're going to call this names, and then we're going to add a relative a template parameter simply called name. So we'll learn more about this in other lab exercises, but hopefully by now you've already gone through all the course materials, so you understand this pretty well already. Now notice that when I click away from that, then it refreshes and adds this little grayed out bottom. The reason why is already recognize that we have a parameter for this endpoint. This is a template parameter that we've added, so it recognizes that. It also now gives me the opportunity to choose which action. The instructions say that we should make this a get, which we will. Then in step 7, it says now we need to go ahead, or I'm sorry, below step 7, in step 8, we want to click this box to configure the endpoint to receive a response. If we don't, then we won't see that response page. So first, the request page, clicking on continue. And when I'm on the request page, it now shows the information that we have so far, plus it gives me the opportunity to see that name parameter that is assigned as a string. Well, in this case, we're okay with that. We don't have to change it to another type, so the instructions say we're going to leave it there, and we're not going to add any query parameters either. So it says we click continue. I will. Now, we have to choose for the response page how the response is going to be defined. In this case, this is going to be a response that is going to be associated with a JSON sample that we're going to either find in a file, or in this case, the instructions say that we're going to go ahead and just type it in ourselves. So I'm going to click this inline link it's asking me to do, and we're simply going to create that JSON content. Now, I'm going to do a little bit of a copy paste. It's not a lot of data, but the lab instructions give me a sample there. But remember what we said about copy paste, sometimes it could be problematic. Now, in this case, I happen to know that the double quotes are going to be okay, but I just want to show you what you kind of need to get used to doing. If you ever do some serious copying and pasting, especially in other scenarios, you may need to make sure that the single quotes or double quotes are actually manually entered because it doesn't always render correctly. So I've done a continue here, and that has been picked up. And according to the lab instructions, since I at this point can leave all their fields as is, it's a JSON media type response, I click continue, which advances me to the summary page. When I expand the endpoint summary as it asked me to do, I can see the information that I've provided. It looks good to me, so I click finish, which now brings me back to the integration canvas where, again, you can see there's the trigger that's been defined and the mapper, which is going to return a response back to the client. We'll be configuring that a bit later. So we click Save, which is up in the right-hand corner, and I get a confirmation banner. We'll see you in the next video. We continue on to practice 1-4, where we're going to design how the integration is going to process the messages. So this is where we're actually going to implement the business logic. And at this point, then, it starts right off with having us do something we're going to do over and over again, and that is fairly soon in the process, identify one or more, or configure is a better word, one or more business identifiers. And so I've got the instructions to say that's below the Save button, and there's a business identifiers icon. There it is. Yeah, so if this is your first time, sometimes it's easy to find, sometimes it depends on your browser type. So as before, I'm going to move my lab instructions out of the way, off to the side. Please follow along in your PDF if you want to see what I'm doing. So I've clicked on that icon according to step 1, and understand the purpose of this is to track certain fields. We're going to be using this for monitoring along the way. Under sources, I can see that I can expand one or more of these data objects. In this case, we just simply need to expand the template parameters. And as we remember, there was really only one. So we're going to drag that name. The instructions for number 2, step 2, says let's put that in the business identifier list. And then to close this box, the easiest way to do that is simply click outside onto the design canvas to essentially save the mapping and close the panel. And then it's always a good practice to save the integration as you go along. This is explicitly step 4, but you'll see it throughout all my lab exercises that I've provided for you. There's the confirmation of the save. You want to kind of save as you go. All right, so for step 5, we got to add essentially over the map element some implementation for defining the response. And so in order to do that, there's two ways. One is I could double click this. The other, if double clicking is not working so well, I simply click on the ellipse and then click on edit. Either way gets us to the ability to open up the map editor where it has two sides. Notice on the sources side I have all the source data objects, and then over here is the target, which in this case is the response that we're going to send back to the client. So it says under sources I need to expand the template parameters section, and under target I expand the response wrapper, which I've done. And then at the step 8 says simply drag and drop the name node over to the hello node. And since we're done, let's click on validate, step 9. Takes just a couple seconds. There's my confirmation. And then to exit the mapper, once again, we use that go back arrow right up here. Step 10, and as always, we're going to click on Save to save our integration so far. And at this point, we're going to kind of just stop there, click on this back arrow again to leave the integration. And at this point, we're back to the project design page where we can now see our Hello World integration in a configured state. We'll see you in the next video. All right, welcome to practice 1-5, the last one here in Lab 1, where we're going to now activate, then test, and then monitor our tested integration because now we're ready to deploy this thing. As always, please follow along with me. I'm going to move my instructions out of the way so that if you need to follow along, please do so in your PDF. So the first task says that within the instructions panel on our design page, we click the ellipses. So for every resource we have in here, in this case I only have one so far, this is where I can open up its menu. In this case, we're now looking to activate the integration, which can only be done if it is now configured, which it is, of course. Now, when that occurs, then now notice this pops out, and you get an option of how what the tracing level should be. Again, in production, you'll typically leave it in production or potentially audit mode. But for our cases, for all our labs, just so we can monitor things better and debug better, we're always going to click debug, and then it gives us the opportunity to look closer to the payloads and that sort of thing. So I click on activate according to the instructions. I should do that. I get my confirmation banner. I see this activation is in progress, and typically it'll just kind of stay there unless you refresh the page. So we have a little refresh icon way over here on the right where you can do that. So I'll click refresh, and I can see it's now in the active state. Now let's move on and go to step 5. Step 5 says if I go to the ellipse there for the menu, I can come down here and I can click on Run to essentially launch the test client that's built in for REST type of configurations. Notice at the top I can see the URI for this particular integration, which technically could be tested from a browser if I wanted to. And then there's different areas for the parameters, headers, if there was a body request required, even an example curl command, as well as if there were integration properties, I could see what those are set to. Now let's go back to the first tab and let's focus on our use case. Our use case is we need to provide something as an argument, so I'm just simply going to put in my name. It asks you to do something similar. Obviously, whatever you put in is what it's going to return because this is a hello world. And we're going to, way up here, we're going to click on Run, which is required for step 7. And it takes just a couple seconds the very first time. And notice immediately down in the response section, I see the status of 200 OK. I also see a link to the instance ID, which is, by the way, this same link up here if I want to go look at that. And of course, I can here see the body response. I could also see any headers that were returned in the request as well. What's important though for troubleshooting is this activity stream, which opens up and populated with all kinds of information about the various milestones, the steps that occurred during my integration. Obviously, there's not much going on in this integration since it's so simple. And then if you step 9, it kind of talks about these little view icons. So if I wanted to see, for example, the message sent to the reply, notice it's in an XML structure. In fact, everything is, even the reply that comes back is shown in the JSON, but it came from this XML layout. But I can click any of these to expand further to see the data mapping, the message received from the data mapper along the way. It gives me a lot of more details when I'm trying to troubleshoot. In step 10, we ask you to go ahead and close this activity stream. The way to do that is simply click on X. And then if you click on this track instances, this is step 11, this is where you can now automatically go to the observe page to see, first of all, you can see all the integrations that have run, but it takes you to the instances tab where I can see all the instances that have run as well to include their success rate and so forth. In this case, my integration indeed has succeeded, just like yours would. So below that, we say congratulations. I'm going to give you a little extra tour since this is the very first exercise. When you want to do some troubleshooting, you can always now click on the primary identifier, not this lower link, which is the definition for the integration, but the upper one right here. And when I click on that, it actually takes me very similar to how this integration was laid out. In this case, it's only two activities or two actions, one after the other with a reply action back to the client. And that same information in the activity stream is available to me that we saw a moment ago when we were doing our testing. Likewise, when I click on here, I can actually download the log, this log file, and save that if I wanted to in a JSON format to look at that later on for troubleshooting use cases. Now, to get out of this, I hit that go back, which takes me back to the observe page. And if I wanted to run another integration test, I could simply go back to the design page and repeat everything I did before. Just click on another run. I could put another name in there. I'll just put David Mills 2, click on a run, and you'll notice I can stay on this page and execute more runs while I'm here. So David Mills 3, and I click on run, and I'll do one more to show you how interesting it is when you do observing. So I've now just executed number 4. So with 4 integration instances being run, when I click on track instances now, notice that I can now see, let's refresh this page, that last one that just ran. There we go. So I see the unique instance ID that was assigned for each one. And then I can see uniquely what happened by clicking in the tracing on the primary identifier to see information about what might have happened during the run. In our case, everything obviously was pretty much the same. So let's jump ahead to step 12. Step 12 says we need to clean up a little bit by clicking the design button. Getting us back here, we can now deactivate our integration to save resources. So since I don't need to run it any longer, we click here. We click to deactivate. I get a confirmation banner to say, do you really want to do that? And indeed, the banner comes back. And again, it stays in this deactivation in progress status until some point you refresh the page. Again, when you refresh that icon, you'll show that it's going back into the configured state. All right, pretty much straightforward. And so as a reminder, we get down to the summary here. We got through a very simple, straightforward, that's why we called it Hello World set of steps. But it's really important that we have this in place because now we have a project where we can do all other integrations and connections, and we'll learn more about that in subsequent lab exercises. A reminder, don't forget to take a look at those appendices, Appendix 1, 2, and 3, if you ever need those instructions later on down the road. That's it. We'll see you in the next lab. Welcome to the overview for Lab 2. Creating a new integration version implementation. So in this lab exercise, there are 4 practices involved. We're simply going to create a new version of the integration we've already created back in Lab 1, but reconfigure the trigger connection, and then we're going to do several other actions to include a switch action, and then implement the logic within the route of that action, which will include other activities like logger, assign action, as well as a notification action for sending an email. There's a lot of different things going on here, so you're going to want to go carefully through each of these steps because this is going to be a little bit, well, significantly more involved than the first one. So from a high level perspective, essentially we're not going to get rid of version 1, the one that you did already. We're simply going to use it to now to help us to build version 2. And once we've deployed this, we'll see then that it can be activated separately or it can actually be activated while the first one is active because it is a new major version. So we'll see you in the next video. So welcome to practice 2-1. We're going to create the new integration version in this particular practice, and then reconfigure the trigger to help set us up for subsequent steps. As always, I'm going to be following all the steps and the tasks step by step by number, but I will move the activity guide out of my way so you can see what I'm doing. Feel free to follow along in the PDF if you wish to. So we're supposed to start here from the projects page. If for some reason you've lost that, remember it's real easy to find if you've logged in for the very first time or returning back to the integration flow. You simply click here, then click on projects, and then you can find your project that you are working on. So now that we're in there within the integrations panel, step 2, we're going to click that ellipsis again. This time click on the create new version link. Step 3 says we want to change the version to 2.0. Now, if you notice by default, it actually changes it to 1.0.1. We're going to replace that last 1 with a 0. So the name's the same, but the version is a major version change. And we click Create Version. And now we'll notice that both integrations exist, and what's different is their version number. All right, moving on to step 5 for our new version. Make sure you're doing the right one. We're going to click on Edit. And on the trigger connection, here we can click here. We can either double click it or we can click here to edit to change it, which is what we're going to do. So the basic information page isn't going to change, but in the real world, we probably would have a different description if we had a description here. So we click continue. Now, here's where we're going to be changing out just a couple of things. We're going to be, well, no, I take that back. I thought we were going to change it here. It's actually going to be on the next page. So we're going to keep the relative resource URI name the same. So there's nothing there. But now on the next page, this is what we're going to change. We're going to add a query parameter. So we click on the add. In order to do that, we need to double click in this name area. And the name of the new query parameter is going to be called email. And it's going to be of data type string. So from the drop-down menu, you can see it there. And then we click below it out of the way for that change to take effect. Since all of the fields can remain the same, we click continue. That was step 12, which now advances us to configure response. Now this was going to change. So beneath this drag and drop section, if I click on inline, there's our response from before. We're now going to replace that content with a new response object, and I'm going to do that now with a copy and paste. And as always with copy and paste, I'm a little bit concerned about the double quotes, but in this particular case, I know that since it's in the sample box, I won't have to replace those. Well, I'll click on continue. And we continue ahead. Now, I'm going to skip on down to step 15, where we need to simply click continue to get out of the box and continue to close this, which takes us to the summary page. And you'll notice on the summary page, not much is different from the first version, other than now we have a query parameter called email. The summary page, you can't actually see the actual JSON object. You have to go back to be able to see that. We click on finish, step 18. We're back on the integration design canvas. And now we can click save to save the integration. And we close the banner. Our integration is now reconfigured to support a different interface. See you in the next video. Continuing on now with practice 2-2, where we're going to start our implementation. We're going to configure the switch action and implement some logic to include a logger action, assign action, and notification action, essentially within that first route. As always, I'm going to be following this task step by step, but I will draw your attention to this caution one more time. When you're using expression editor, it's a lot easier to start making some mistakes. So watch what I do, especially if this is your very first time. Just simple mistakes can cause either a validation error, or in some cases it might pass through, but then you don't get the runtime behavior you expected. So as always, I'm going to pull this out of the way, starting with task 1 as I follow the instructions. It says to hover your cursor between the trigger and map elements. That's right there. Notice as I move it carefully and slowly, I finally get that little plus icon. When I click on that, it says I want to add an action within there. It opens up now this box, and in order to get to the list of actions, I click the Action tab. So I'm looking for a switch action. I look down below here. There it is, and I simply select it. And notice now I have a switch action with two routes. The route 1 hasn't yet to be defined, which we'll do in a moment. But now I can also add additional routes. We'll see that later on. If I need to add another route, I could do that here. Let me erase that because we're not going to do that now. Let me delete that route. So in this case, we're just going to have route 1 and the otherwise route. And if I look at step 3, it wants me to now edit this route and go to define it. There's two things I want to do when I edit. The first thing we do is give it a meaningful name. So in this case, we're going to call it send, according to instructions, send email. All right, and then I click here to apply and save that. And then we got to actually edit the condition for how to take this route. So to the right of the value field is where we switch from designer view to developer view, which allows us to do other things like put in parameters. So the instructions say we're going to expand the query parameters under sources, and we're going to use the value of the email query parameter. The step 9 says if that email is not equal to what, and the what in this case, step 10 is going to be basically if it's not empty. So in order to achieve that, what we're going to do is simply put in two double quotes, and you might have to kind of move around to find that space. Two single quotes. So single quote, there's no space in between them, and then when I click below that, it picks it up. So email is not equal to essentially null. It's not an empty value. So I click away from here into design canvas and then save my integration so far. And so essentially we're saying when there's an email address specified in a query parameter, we're going to take that route. Otherwise, we're going to take this route. So right above step 12, there's some instructions that I'll draw your attention to. Let's take a look at it. This little icon over here to the right can give you some warnings or errors. I don't want you to freak out about this. This is a good time to remind you that you shouldn't try to chase these things down too early, because I'm not done with my configuration. There are still things that need to be done. So rather than letting that bother you, wait until you get all the way through the end of your labs. And then if you get to the end of your lab and you followed all the instructions and you try now to save it and activate it later on, and you're getting, no, I can't activate it because there's something wrong. Now's the time to go back to here and investigate to see what these things are saying and what's wrong. Like, for example, this one says, hey, there's no actions underneath the route. Well, yeah, I know that. Thanks. There's no actions underneath this otherwise route. Yeah, I know that too. So no big deal. The other thing I want to draw your attention to is, remember the business identifier we had already created? Well, because that didn't change, we don't have to configure that again, because remember, we picked that up and we did that the first time when we created version 1. All right, I digress. Let's go ahead and go back to our instructions down to adding a logger action beginning with step 12. So in step 12, it says we need to click the add icon to launch the inline menu, but within this route box. So that's where it's located. Under actions, we're looking for logger. And in this case now, same thing, same pattern. We're going to give it a meaningful name by clicking this icon. This is step 14. And it says to call it log incoming. So, and we'll click that to apply. And now we need to configure the logger message itself. By the way, notice that there's two ways to do this. You can always create this log, or you can do it only when the tracing level is set for audit. This is typically used in certain production scenarios where you want to create some sort of audit log message. All right, so notice the next thing it asks us to do in step 16 is, again, switch from designer view to developer view. By the way, clicking that back again takes me back to designer view. That's back to developer view, and that's how you can tell. So now we click the functions tab because we want to add a concatenation function, which is under the string area. And I find concat, and I simply drag that into the logger message. So now I have a concat function ready to be used. Step 18 says let's go ahead and remove the stuff in between the parentheses, which I will do now. And next, it says we want to enter some text. This hello world was invoked by, comma, and then it asks me for another single space. So I'm going to copy this in, but remember I warned you about the copy and paste. It can get us in trouble. So while I've done that, I know from experience that I need to get rid of that single quote, replace it with a manual single quote. Same thing with this one over here. And then I want to make sure that the only thing after that comma is just a single space and no more. All right, and I'll click away from that. Next, step 20, I need to find the template parameters, back to input sources, expand there, and we're going to now take the name field, which was provided by the client, and we're going to paste that before the closing parentheses. So let's go ahead and do that. Drag name to this location. And so notice the full view. If I click away from that, I have the designer view. Click back in here, I have the full path. And now we have hello world was invoked by space, whatever name was provided. And then in step 22, it asked me to paste in some additional information. So let's go ahead and do that. So we come here after name, and I'm going to paste in what was asked me to do. Once again, I'm going to replace that single quote with one. Notice, so following the name, concatenated string will be a period, and then there's a space. Email will be sent to, there's a single quote, and then we're ready for the next parameter. But before we do that, we need to make sure there's a single single space after that so that it doesn't run into the next string. Now I'm going to step 23. I'm expanding query parameters, putting my cursor there, and we're going to drag this email value into here. So there's my location for the email address being sent. Again, going back to designer view, I can now see the logic of this. Hello world was invoked by space, somebody's name, followed by another space. Email is going to be sent to space. There's going to be whatever that email address is that was provided. And now before these final closing parentheses, we need to have a little bit of logic. We add the comma, and then we're going to add a single quote, exclamation mark, single quote, and that ends the concatenate expression. So if you look in your lab instructions, and I can do this real quick, I just want to make sure that my message lines up. You want to double check this as well. Again, it doesn't really matter if you have extra spaces or not, or that sort of thing between the commas, because what matters is once you're into a single quote, I've got a space in there, for example, and I've got a space in there, for example. Make sure that you've done the same thing. The other thing to be aware of is sometimes the namespaces don't always line up. Depends on when you do it. In my case, it's actually namespace 12 and namespace 18, just like the instructions show. All right, we're going to move on now, and we're going to toggle back. This is step 26. so that we can see it in, again, designer view. And then, of course, we'll click Save. Well, that closes the logger, and that saves the integration. Okay, moving down now to 28. It says we need to click the add icon below the logger, so it's kind of attached to it. So we're basically saying I want to do an action after the logger action. So that opens up the inline menu, and we're going to now add an assign action. So when I click on assign action, once again, I can give it a meaningful name by clicking the little pencil icon, and we're supposed to call it assign secondary tracking as our name. And again, click here to save that. Now the instruction says step 32, to click the add icon, and we're going to click inside this variable area. Instead of calling it, whatever that name is, we want to call it something a little bit more meaningful. So actually, I take that back. Instead of giving it another name, we're actually going to assign it to tracking variable number 2. So to the right of that value field, we're going to switch this to the developer field, and allows us to assign it to a value other than nothing. In this case, we'll expand query parameters, and this is step 36, dragging email in for that value. Then we click save once again. That will save the configuration of the assign action, as well as saving the integration, and there's our confirmation banner. So we now have 2 actions so far. Moving down to step 38, we're adding yet another action below the assign. Once again, click there to open up the inline menu, and we're looking for the notification action. We're going to configure how to send an email out to somebody. Once again, the edit little pencil icon allows me to give this a meaningful name for this action. We're calling it send email. And we click here to save that. Now the instructions walk us through how to edit this. It's a little bit different. Notice each of the details of notifications broken into different sections. So when I click on 2, I get a box, and it also opens the sources panel. So if I click the query parameters down here, and I can drag email to the 2, which makes sense. We're going to send an email to the email address that the client provides. Then we click on the from field. We could do a bunch of different things. In this case, we're just going to echo their email address as the reply address, or the from address, if you will. A lot of different things that you could do if you wanted to. Let's jump on down to step 46. We're going to put some data for the subject field. In this case, we'll now click over here to developer view, step 47. And once again, I'm going to go to that functions tab to grab that concat function, where we're going to build a little bit of information. Let's go ahead and remove the content from inside the parentheses once again. And this time, instead of trying to copy paste, I'm just going to type in what they asked me to. It's going to be hello, space, single quote, there's a comma, and there's another space after the comma. And then, or actually, yeah, I got a single space, yes, there, and then a space after the comma, so I have some room. And then under Import Sources tab, here's where we're going to go ahead and grab that name, again, send the template parameters, and we'll place that right there at that location. All right, and then once we have that, we have a completed message, and again, it gives us a review of what that should look like. Hello, template parameters, name, and notice then there's an ending comma here. Well, we don't need that comma, so we need to get rid of that. Let's do that now, since there's nothing else to concatenate. Oh, I see the mistake I made. Oh, I'm glad I checked this. The reason I had an ending comma is because I pasted this in at the wrong location. There should be a comma after in fact, both this and this is messed up. See what I did? So this is how easy it is to make a mistake. I'm just walking you through it. So hello space the closing quote and then the comma for the next parameter. So now that's looking a little better, and now indeed that matches the syntax correctly. All right. So now we're into step 53. We're going to do the body, and this is really just a whole lot easier to do a copy and paste. You can type this all in, but I'm going to go ahead and do a copy paste from the lab instructions. Again, I'm going to warn you that sometimes, since these double quotes don't render correctly from a PDF, or depending where you're pasting it from, I'm going to replace all those double quotes. In this case, just 2 of them right there for the body. Now, once you've done that, we now click away from that, and we have this configuration. In fact, in step 54, it gives us a screenshot of what this is supposed to look like. And indeed, mine matches up nicely. So we're going to go ahead and click Save, which will finish the configuration for that notification. And there's a confirmation banner. And we're almost done with this practice. Moving down to step 56, we're going to add a map action to define what data goes back to the client. Yes, there is already a map action, but we want to do something unique for this route. So click Add once again to step 56, and this time we're going to select Map, step 57. So to configure the mapper, we're going to say, yep, well, there's only one endpoint to map it to. That's going to be the response back to the client. So we select it and click Create. And for the configuration, we just simply look on the left side. We expand our template parameters for our name, and then what we do and query parameters for the email. Then over on the response wrapper, notice this is where we can map the data that gets sent back. So the instructions tell us to map the name to hello and the email element to the other email element below. And our mapping is completed, so we click Validate. This is step 62. And now that all the mapping is validated and saved, we can exit the map editor. And finally, our last step, 64, is to click Save, and indeed the integration is saved at this point. See you in the next video. All right, we're continuing on with practice 2-3, where we're going to implement the logic for that other branch called otherwise. And in this case, we will add a different map action to how to return the response. And then when we're done, we'll delete that original map action that we no longer need. Again, I'll be following along with the tasks, beginning with step 1. So this time we choose the add icon right here inside the otherwise box, branch if you will. We're going to the actions tab, and we're going to create a different logger action. There'll be a slightly different message, so we have to give it a different name since it's a unique action. This is supposed to be called log incoming without email. And I'll click apply. So this time for the logger message, beginning in step 5, where we switch to developer mode, again, we're going to find that that concat function. And we're going to be typing in a different message. So step 9 says this is going to be hello world was invoked by space, and we're going to end quote and then comma, and ready for the next thing to paste in, which is going to be under input sources. Expanding template parameters, will simply drag the name field into here. And now that looks correct. And we need to add a period for that. So in order to do that, we'll simply add a comma. and single quotes, period, single quote, and that will complete that implementation. So now I'll double check my logger message with the instructions, and it does look the same. So we click Save to finish the logger and save the integration so far. And now there's nothing else to do, no email to send. The only thing we need to do on this particular branch is to create a different map action. So below the logger message, this is step 14 and 15, we'll go and add a map action. Again, we're going to map back to the client as a response. And here now we need to, under template parameters, expand that, and under response wrapper for the response, we simply drag name to hello as specified in step 18. Click validate and close the banner. I can exit now my mapper with the go back arrow and click save for my integration and close the banner. So actually we're almost done with our implementation, but scroll down here, take a look at step 22. Below the switch box, we no longer need this, it's not being used. So here we can just simply delete it. I can simply click here and delete and confirm it, and it's gone. And once again, click save to save the integration. Click go back with the instructions at 26, and it says, indeed, I should have my version 2 in a configured state. See you in the next video. Okay, we're at practice 2-4 where we're now ready to activate, test, and monitor our integration. Again, we'll do a couple different test scenarios, one where we provide the email and one where we don't. So let's go with step 1. I'll pull this out of our way. And first thing to do is on integrations panel, we need to activate the version 2 integration. So the ellipsis icon, and we click activate, and we're going to make sure it's on debug, which it is, and click activate. Close the banner. We'll see activation is in progress. Click here to refresh that state to be in an active state. So for this first test, we need to go ahead and just provide a name and an email. So let's click on Run. This is step 5. And then we're going to provide my name again. And what I'll do here for the email address, I'm going to be putting my email address here. But since this is my work email, I'm not going to worry about y'all seeing it. I won't use my personal email address. Obviously, you would use an address where you can get email too. And then I click the Run button. And once again, we should notice under the response, the path it should have taken was where we get both both parameters, values being sent back. If we go into the activity screen, to the stream, we can kind of see all the different actions that were taken, as well as the path that was taken. I'll talk about that in just a moment. So let me click X to close that. And I'm going to now briefly check my email client. And checking my email client, indeed, there's my response from the OIC mail service to my email address, and that's the message that we pasted in for the body. So that looks good. Let's go back to our lab instructions and says, well, let's do another test to see where we only provide the name. So in the request section, we provide the name. It says you can change it to another one. I'm going to change it to David Mills 2, but to get rid of this, we kind of empty that out, and then we deselect that parameter, which was step 13. Step 14, we click another Run. Again, under response, we should see a different JSON response, which obviously just shows the name. And again, we can close the activity stream once it comes through by clicking the X. Now, what we want to do now in step 17 under track instances will take us to that observe page on the instances tab. I can now see both of them. see they both succeeded. And of course, we're exploring this a little bit more to see that, yeah, there's my primary identifier. The first one was my name, second one was my name with a 2. And notice the additional tracking variable that we provided because the email address was there. But notice in the activity stream, when we explore this a bit further for one of these, we can kind of take a look. In this one, I can see green path of the route it took because there was an email address along with the activity stream. Let's back out here. And if I check the other one, it should show a different green path, sure enough, down the otherwise branch and along with the messages that were there as well. And we'll back out of there. Step 22 says go back to our design page, and we're going to shut things down. So again, we go to the hello world that's activated, version 2. We're going to deactivate it, confirm it there. In a deactivation state, we close the banner and we refresh our page, and it shows back to the configured page. And of course, if you review your summary, just like I'm doing with you right now, you'll see that we did create a new integration, but it was based on an existing one. So we just use a different version number, reconfiguring the trigger, a switch action where we had 3 actions, or actually 4 actions total in the Route 1 branch, and a couple more actions in the otherwise branch. We'll learn about using functions, more about XSLT expressions, as well as configuring how to send an email. This concludes Lab 2. Welcome to the overview for Lab 3, creating an integration to invoke a REST API. So let's take an overview look at this one here. There's going to be 7 lab practices that we're going to take you through step by step to achieve this particular use case. Essentially, we're looking to connect to an external application that happens to use an API key for security access, which is fairly common with certain kinds of REST applications. And the goal is to set up an integration that itself will have a REST API to REST clients to achieve essentially getting back results about the weather at a particular location. So in order to get to this open weather application, the first thing you'll need to do is obtain an API key, which is obviously going to be in the first practice. So walk through this very carefully through each step and take a little extra time, because this first practice may take a little bit longer simply because you're waiting for the key to be returned to you in your email. So we'll get started with practice 3-1, where indeed we're going to navigate to the open weather map organization here, and we're going to set up an account so that we can obtain the API key. Now, I'm not going to be able to demonstrate all these steps to you. I'll just kind of show you how to get started. And the reason why is I've already got an API key. The goal is to get that API key value and save it in Notepad or someplace. So later on in a later lab practice, you'll be able to use it when configuring the REST adapter connection. So I encourage you to read through all of this and follow each step by step. What I'll do is just show you how it's going to look when you first get started. I'll copy this URL. Let me step this out of the way. And it gets you to this very first page. Now, I've already got credentials. I've already signed in and registered my email. And by the way, this is free, so we're not asking you to spend any money. But step 2 says the very first thing you need to do, unless you already have an account, for some reason, you probably don't. Just click on this create an account link. And so here's where the lab exercise has you define your username, an email that you have access to, set yourself up a password, answer the questions here, and you may choose to opt out of consenting to communications. You probably don't want any of this. And then I'm not a robot, and you create your account. Once you've created your account, if I can go back to the lab instructions. Next thing you'll do then is you'll be able to verify your email email address, because they'll send you an email, and from that point on you'll go through the instructions where you can copy your API key value. And so, as it mentions here, since it can take up to 2 hours for this new free account, just be aware that you will not be able to move on into this lab until you have an API key. My experience has been that it can take as little as 20 or 30 minutes, so don't be too concerned about that. We'll see you in the next video. All right, let's continue now with practice 3-2. In fact, if you're still waiting for your API key, you can actually do this practice while you're waiting for that key from OpenWeather, because this is just going to get us started with creating the integration, reusing the REST trigger that we did back in practice 1, and actually our lab 1 and also lab 2. So we'll walk through each of these steps. The goal here is to get started within your project. And again, I'm going to be following the steps from task 1 all the way through. So follow along with me. Here we go. All right, step 1 says we need to get to the projects page. If you're just logged back in, you'll be here. Go to projects, find your projects page. And now step 2 says we need to go to the integrations panel to click to add another new integration. In this case, we're going to create a new integration, again, an application pattern, and we're expected to call it weather by city. All right, nothing else to put in here. Click create. All right, so we'll select the only trigger that we have so far, and that's the REST trigger we've used before. And then on this page, we're going to give it a name. They want us to call it get weather by city. And nothing else is needed, so I click continue. And as always, the most important part of a resource configuration for REST is to come up with a relative URI that's meaningful. The lab instructions say we want to call it weather. And then the template parameter is going to be called city with curly brackets. And we'll leave the action to be get is what we're going to be doing. That's graded in already, so that is needed to review that page, but we do need to configure a response. So I click there and continue. So on this page here, the main point here they wanted to draw your attention to is since we're not adding any query parameters, we're just verifying that we're okay with the template parameter being a string, and in this case, yes, we are. So we'll click continue to move past this page so we can configure the response. Now on this page, what they're asking for is to, this time when we change it to a JSON sample, instead of trying to type in the sample in line, which would require a lot of typing or copying and pasting, instead I'm going to show you how to drag and drop a file. So this is a case where in your resources folder, and I'm going to bring that in so you can kind of see mine, under when you unzip the file, if you recall earlier, under the resources folder, there should be a lot of resources. And what they're looking for this lab exercises is a get weather by city response JSON file. So make sure you select the right one when you bring that in. All right, so I'm going to move that out of the way so you can see me do it. I'm going to go to my location. Get weather by city response. And that brings that in. And what's interesting is you can actually now take a look at it by clicking on this inline link. and we can see then what the response format is, the sample JSON is that comes from that's going to be returned back to our client. So just a quick little tutorial. So this is not the response from the weather service. This is the response that we designed to return back to our client. We decided we're going to give them a city, a country, a longitude, latitude, and the current weather and the current temperature. And how we get that information will be by making two separate calls to this external service. All right, that makes sense? Let's go ahead and click continue to move to the next lab step. And by the way, just to keep track with where we are in our lab instructions, we are again expecting to see that, and we're expected to move on to the summary page. So let's do that now. Expand the endpoint summary and see that it's completed, and we can click finish. Now this is a point that sometimes once that has been configured, your browser could get to a state of a spin. I've got it notated in the lab instructions. If that does happen, you can always refresh your page, just reload the page. Sometimes things can get stuck and your integration is not necessarily locked. It's just an issue with the with your browser. The important thing is that once you've done that, we click save, which is step 21. And that banner has been displayed. All right, so step 22, we talk about the business identifiers again. There's that icon, and we'll be doing this for every integration from now on because every integration requires at least one business identifier. So in this case, for this business identifiers field, we're going to use the template parameter that was sent in from the client, which is the city, and that's it. We click on save to close that, and also to save the integration. We then click the go back arrow to exit the integration canvas. And now we can see that our new weather by city integration is at least partially configured before we move on to the next exercise. See you in the next video. All right, let's continue on now with practice 3-3. Here's where we're going to create the invoke connection that's going to end up being used twice, actually, to call the open weather application. As once again, if you haven't yet received your API key, you can't do this particular practice yet, so you'll need to wait until you have a key, again, that you did back in practice 3-1 to try to obtain it. All right, I'm going to step through, beginning with task 1. As always, I'll move this out of our way so we can see what's going on. We're going to be this time in the connections pane when I click there to create a new REST adapter connection. So we filter for that, select REST, and the name we're supposed to use for it is Open Weather, which is meaningful. And since we're only invoking this is not a trigger. This is the invoke role. Let's choose invoke and click create. So now we need to specify how we're going to connect type. The options are either an open API or a base URL, which is what we have. So we click that one, and we're going to copy and paste that URL for this particular web application. I'll paste that in. I got that in from the documentation or from the lab instructions. Obviously, you would have gotten that yourself if you were doing this on your own from the vendor. And you'll notice then there are a whole bunch of other optional policies that we could use, for example, two-way SSL. Those aren't required for this service. Now for security, you'll notice there's different security policies. All of these are based upon what the vendor or what the actual service expects or requires. Everything from no policy to basic authentication to all these other we talked about in our lab lectures. In this case, it's an API key based authentication, and now it gives us a field for pasting that in. So at this point, you should have your API key. I'm going to paste mine in, So this will work. And there it is. I would display it for you, but then it's not appropriate for me to share my API key with you. So that's done, but then you'll need to do something else here as well. Look at the next step. For optional security, you had to define, well, how is that key expected to be used when it accesses this open weather site? And so here's where you need to paste in or type in how that's done. And what it is, it goes as a query parameter called app ID. And that's going to be referencing, we'll use this to reference with the curly brackets, this API key that we just pasted in a second ago. So double check that you've copied and pasted or typed that in correctly. Again, you're saying go ahead and create a query parameter called app ID and send in its value equals to what we just put into here. And if you'll notice at this point, we're done with our configuration, and so we click on test. The only problem is we're testing to make sure the syntax is correct. We're not really testing to see if the API key is any good. I'll save that. And that's where now we have a way to test that for yourself. What we're going to do, let me close this, is step 14 says, well, how do you know that key is correct? Did you type it? Did you mistype it? Did something go wrong? So if you look at step 14, there's a URL that you can copy and paste and replace the value with your API key value. So I'm going to open up another browser tab, and I'm going to replace, here's that URL. I'm going to replace that key value with the very same API key that I just pasted in for testing this connection. So there we go. And all I'm expecting is, yes, does it work? Am I getting a response or am I getting some kind of an error? And because the key is valid, the response is coming back in. All right, so that is what you need to do. If something goes wrong, then you need to see if you got the wrong API key or you mistyped the value or didn't capture all of it. Again, since API key and this connection is required before you move on, the notes here in practice in step 15, let's kind of look at that, requires that you don't really move on to the next practice until you have a valid key, until you have a successful test, and this connection is valid. Okay, we'll see you in the next video.